welcome everyone to our Kepler College Astrology Book Club author Q&A. My name is Misty Lane and I'm your book club admin, and I'm here today with Wanda Sellar, who is the author of our August book of the month, Chart Shapes: The Code to Interpretation. And as people stream in, I will just be keeping an eye out on the chat for everyone watching. So please feel free, if you have a question to ask Wanda at any time, feel free to type it into the chat and I'll make sure that we can address it. But Wanda, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. Let's start. Can you tell us by telling us a little bit about yourself and your drive behind writing this book?
Well, I've been an astrologer for many years now, but prior to that, I started life really as a writer. I'm still a writer. It's probably my very first love, and well, it's sort of it's a balance between writing and astrology, but I combine it, and so it's kind of natural for me to put my knowledge into writing. Now, I came across chart shapes years ago when there was only two books out then, maybe only one, so it's many years ago. And I found it very hard, really, to make sense of it. And then over the years, I would read about it. And then just a few years ago, I began to look at charts and their shapes, and I realized that it really worked. And so I just got more and more into it. And before I knew it, I was writing the book.
Wonderful. And so chart shapes, I remember when I took Fundamentals 1 with Kepler, we had a whole lesson about chart shapes, and it really is just a really solid foundation for where you should be beginning when looking at the chart. But it is kind of difficult at first. But I found I wouldn't say I've mastered it yet, but once I've been able to really take the shape into account, it has really just opened up the delineation for me. So in the book
Yes,
you
that's
mentioned,
the important thing, really, that it gives you a good starting point. It doesn't obliterate everything you've learned up to that point. You still use all that you know. But you maybe just go around the chart in a slightly different way. I mean, everybody's got their own way of beginning. We've all worked it out. Some of us look at the strongest planet by essential dignity, or some just start at the ascendant, or some just start at the sun. But I would like to say that when I'm delineating a chart, and I'll start with chart shapes, I'll make the notes as I go on until I finished the chart, finished delineating. But when I then see the client, I don't start in the same way as I did when I began to analyze it. I start with where the transits are. What is it affecting in the chart? But by then I've got the chart in my head, I've got the shape in my head. So I just start with, because that's quite often why people come to see you, because of what's happening in their lives.
Yeah, they want to know what's going on.
That's right. So they may not have time just to sit there whilst you're going around. Oh, you're like this, you're like that, you're this or that. They don't want to know. You can weave that in at some point, of course, but I think starting where they're at. But before the client comes, I'll go into it through chart shapes.
Okay. So it's kind of that the preparation beforehand.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, especially, and if we're working with a client who maybe is not that well versed in reading charts, I do imagine that jumping into chart shapes could be confusing. And that was a mistake I also made when I first started learning about that, where I would just like dive into the nitty-gritty of it all with the person I was working with, and then it would just confuse them totally. So I definitely have stopped being like, oh, the handle of your bucket and funnels, and yeah, you can
No, they're
easily
not
lose
interested.
people.
I mean, your clients aren't interested in the technology. Obviously,
Hmm.
sometimes, or the technique, should I say, um, sometimes you bring it in because it's just relevant for that moment. You say, oh, yes, look, well, the reason is blah, blah, blah. You've got this handle, or your planets, they're all at different areas of the chart. And so, that gives you the idea of being maybe a little bit confrontational, but really you do love being with people. I mean, it may be relevant at times to put in a bit of technique, but most of the time, our technique of chart shapes and anything else, I should imagine, is just for us to work on the chart beforehand. And I don't think you ever master chart shapes.
That's a good point. Yeah, that does make me feel better because and you mention it in the book, especially towards the end, how um oftentimes they don't perfectly fit into a certain category.
Mm,
And different astrologers are going to come up with different observations regarding the label. And so
mm.
I really want to know, one question I have is how important do you think it is to really focus on trying to make a chart fit into a label? Because especially when I first learned about chart shapes, I was like, this is very helpful, but eventually I did get very lazy with it. And I was just taking the general shape into account without being like, oh, that's a bucket. Oh, that's a bowl. I would be like, oh, this person is very contained or they're scattered around the chart. Do you think we should be really focusing on the label?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I I I think in the beginning it's important to get the shapes into your mind as to, what actually constitutes the seven shapes and their let's say derivatives, their variations. But after that, you have to work with the chart you have and make your own shape, which you will. You'll start off thinking it's this shape or that shape, and then you think, no, that planet is just a little bit out of the picture. And then immediately it's the planet that's out of the picture is the one you should
Yeah,
be concentrating on.
I think, yeah, you're definitely right about that. And reading this book, I will say I did think at first that I was a bowl shape when I was very first learning about chart shapes. After reading this book, I'm like, maybe I'm a little bit of a bowl in a bucket. And so I did come up with my own bucket variation that I'm a teacup because my handle of the bucket is kind of lazy off to the side, but not quite perfectly fitting into a bowl shape.
Mm,
So
mm.
I'm like, I must be a teacup or something.
Yeah, you do. The shapes aren't there for you to squeeze the chart into at
Yeah.
all. They're just a guide, really, for you to fix more of a shape in your mind of where the planets are rather than looking at the chart and the planets are just all over the place and you don't
Mhm.
know really where you're going with them. So they just give you something to begin with. And then there are kind of steps which I I worked out myself to some degree, but also looking at, the past geniuses, so to speak, and seeing what they thought as well. But it could be that everyone working with them will develop their own ideas.
I love that. And I think it's beautiful that we can have that freedom to come up with our own ideas and come up with our own categories that we resonate with, even if it's not quite in line with the label of everything. So yeah, that does, I think, clear things up. I remember in our group discussions, especially when we were first starting to read the book, there was some confusion between the difference of chart shapes versus aspect patterns. And
Mm,
so,
mm,
can
mm.
you clarify for people who may be more beginner level? Can you clarify the difference for us? And what's your take on the interplay between the two?
Right. When looking at the shape of the planet, of the chart through the planets, then you just look at the shape of the planets. Do not look initially at the aspects. To get the shape of the chart through the planets, just look at the planets. Only then, when you've decided on what you're looking at and where you're starting from, only then go into the aspects. What, for instance, say you've just looked at this chart is a bucket, right? So you're going to go to the handle. Is the handle in a T-square, a grand cross, or even a trine? Then you begin to look at the shapes of the aspects and what they're making. So you're getting two things really, aren't you? You're getting the shape of the planets, and you're getting the aspects, which are much more technical, and they have a mystery of their own as well, don't they?
Yep.
The kind of shapes that they make, because where the aspects are concerned, that may be the fundamental basis of the universe, because the kind of shapes the aspects make are found in minerals and gems, and which makes the earth and it makes the universe. So we've got a whole new ball game there, but you have to put the two together. Does that make sense?
I think that does make sense, and I think that was beautifully put, that it's really the foundation of what makes everything up. So yeah, that does really
Mm.
clarify, I think. We do have someone in the chat. Lana says, I'm not sure if it's on my end or y'all's, but you are coming in and out. Okay. Okay, so we have some sound difficulties, but I think, Lana, I think that's just on your end. Wanda, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Okay. And Rebecca says also that we are clear and consistent. So Lana, I would recommend maybe either trying on if you're on a computer, maybe trying on your phone or trying on a different device or logging in, logging out. But I hope that helps. But otherwise, I think you could probably uh might be able to hear us better once we're recorded into the group. Okay, and thank you everyone for chiming in on that. Um, okay. So let me see what other questions we have. Okay, can you tell us a little bit about the history of how this technique was developed? One thing that really stood out to me was that it's a relatively new technique. I think you mentioned that it was only developed within the last century. And so, what's the background behind this?
Well, it all comes from Mark Edmund Jones, who wrote
Mhm.
a book in 1941, if I remember rightly, and that's where it began. And I mean, he was a brilliant astrologer, so I hesitate to say this, but I didn't always find the um, analysis of his charts, uh, of the charts he gave as examples, really sort of going deeply enough. And then about 30 years later, in was it 1970s, the 70s, there was another book, and I didn't find the analysis going too deeply there. And so that's what I kind of concentrated on, to get more into the analysis. But it all started with Jones, and I think he had that probably mathematical mind, or
Mhm.
and that sort of put that together. So it it was a brainwave of an astrologer, which I suppose, so many people have made a lot of different ways of looking at charts and their techniques, and when I was young, the newest technique was that espoused by the Huber School of Astrology, and they were looking at things differently, and that kind of worked for me for a while. So people do come up with new ideas, and as I say,
Mhm.
it's Mark Edward Jones, and then it was Robert Jansky, um, and I don't know if there are any other books on this topic at all. And then I came along, never for one moment thinking I would ever write a book on this topic.
Why didn't you think you? Because I remember when we were first chatting, you said that you really didn't resonate with chart shapes at first. So
No, no, I
what,
didn't. I found them
what
hard.
changed? Okay.
Um, because I was looking at a particular chart. Now, for the life of me, I cannot remember what chart it was. I think it was a famous person. And the shape of the chart was so clear. And so I sort of looked up Mark Edmund Jones and the other chap, and I began to just follow the shape and see where it took me. And I thought, looking at this through the shape. So then I began to look at many other charts just by their shapes. And I was astounded how things just fell into place through personal charts and through charts of celebrities, famous people. We think we know what they're like. So, it's a good way to learn, isn't it?
Hmm.
But having said that, when I began to look at celebrity charts through their shapes, their planetary shape, sometimes the beginning was in a totally different place to what they are known for. I mean,
Oh.
for instance, you may look at a chart because you want to know what makes them famous, what makes them talented. So you'll look for that. You'll look for
Hmm.
exactly that. But it may not be what really drives them. That could be shown in the shape, somewhere quite hidden away in the chart, so to speak. And then suddenly you think, that's what drives them. So you get a slightly different view.
Yeah, I love that. And you make a good point about celebrity charts that we do look for what we know, and it's a really helpful tool, especially when you're first learning. But there are so many factors behind the scenes of their fame and what they
Mm,
do.
mm,
And I think for quite a few famous people, yeah, they might be driven to fame, but there are others who are just like, this is just my job. This is just what I do for a living, and it's not entirely who I am. So I do love when we can look at celebrity charts and really get kind of deeper into, wait, what is actually behind this famous
mm,
person?
mm.
Wonderful. Okay. And since we have more people coming in, I'll mention again, if you have any questions for us, please type it into the chat and we will get them answered. And Wanda, another question I had, um, do you how do you work with chart shapes beyond just the natal chart? Do you look at it for event charts, solar return charts? How do you work with that?
I basically use them for natal charts. No,
Hmm.
I don't use them for hori or event as a rule, but
Okay.
I can't help but see a shape sometimes when I'm looking at an event or hori or another. And but I wouldn't make that the important thing. I mean, with a hori, you want the ascendant ruler and you want the quesited ruler, and you want to see what they're doing. You're not too bothered about the shape. However,
Mhm.
if I see a shape there, I'll wonder how it fits into the picture, because a hori isn't always just yes or no. Well, it is often yes or no. But that's not good enough if you've got a client there who wants to know
Right.
why is it no or why is it yes, or they may want more sympathy, understanding, explanations, and
Hmm.
maybe the shape would help with the psychology. But in the main, I reserve it for natal charts.
Okay, so maybe not the primary thing to look at with non-natal charts, but something that can be taken into account.
Mm.
Um, would you, so when it comes to more natal-based charts, I was thinking about like synastry overlays, or I recently had my solar return, so I was looking at my solar return chart through the lens of what shape it was in. Um, could looking at those shapes when it comes to more predictive based work within the natal chart, do you have any insight on that, or is it
Well,
pretty
when
much the
it comes
same?
to synastry, um, I would very much look at, you've got two people here, so you'd look at the different shapes and you'd get an idea what drives them through the shape, because
Hmm.
you do each chart individually. So
Right.
yes, you'd get an idea, and that could help in synastry. Also, you would look at the overlay, one chart on another. Uh, it's best often, I think, but you can't make hard and fast rules, for one's planets to fall into the empty places of the other planets because of the other chart. You with me? So if you've got
Hmm.
empty space, empty houses, and the other person's how planets fall into the empty houses, then it makes a more rounded relationship. But that also has its problems because the other person may not be used to those areas being activated.
Oh,
Uh,
yes.
on the then if you have two charts and you have planets falling on top of each other, and I'm not talking about aspects or anything,
Hmm.
just the actual shape for one on top of the other. And if the planets are falling on top of each other, then of course you may get at first, oh God, we're doing the same thing. We're off and understanding each other, and then of course you get the competition and the so one is as good as the other, but at least you know what's happening, and if you're the astrologer advising, you can see it.
Right.
Yeah, so look at the
Perfect.
two different shapes, but then, as I say, none of these shapes are. Quite often, you get a chart where the shape doesn't quite line up, and you feel you've got two shapes.
Hmm.
So obviously, the chart becomes more complicated. Um,
Right.
but it's that still helps towards analysis when things
So
don't
worth
fit.
taking into account at least.
Yes, it's worth
Okay.
taking into account.
Perfect. And then we have a question in the chat. Rebecca says that she would love to hear more about boundary planets. So, what do you have to say about boundary planets and their role in the judgment of the chart shape and the overall delineation?
Well, what I found was that the boundary planets will often give you a first inkling of what drives that person as well, because I found that um, if if the two boundary planets you're looking at, if they make some kind of statement, like for instance, you've got two boundary planets, Mercury, Jupiter. That to me makes a statement immediately that that person is being driven by the mind.
Mhm.
Or if you have two boundary planets like Mars and Saturn, you know that person is incredibly strong, but they've had to learn to be through um, difficulties and challenges. and I really saw this working, and I can't remember the name of the film, but it was an American film, and it was about a soldier who was a conscientious objector, but he ended up saving hundreds and thousands, I don't know how many, of lives.
Hmm.
Um, he was sent to war, World War II. He was sent to war as a conscientious objector. So he drove an ambulance, and he was shunned by everyone. It's a true story, and I can't remember the film, and I can't remember the name of the man because he was, a true person. He was a carpenter to
Hmm.
begin with, but he ended up through his actions not firing a shot, but saving many lives and putting his own life at risk. So I thought, I've got to look at his chart. And although there's no time, I noticed that his boundary planets were Mars and Pluto, with the moon in between, so to speak.
Hmm.
And I thought, well, that's what gave him all that courage.
Oh, yes.
He diced with death, Mars and Pluto, even though he was quite a mild man, and he wasn't at all violent, and he
Hmm.
hated um, guns and anything to do with controversy. But when it actually came to it, those boundary planets, Mars, Pluto, gave him that strength and courage. And so that made me think, well, these boundary planets are really important. And then you have something like Mars and Venus, boundary planets, and you're going to get someone very creative, very attractive, maybe as well, into the arts, um, sun and moon, the public. So look at what the statement is being made by the two boundary planets.
I love that. I will have to take a look at my boundary planet and really see what's going on there,
Mm.
I'm thinking, because that piqued my curiosity. And that does sound like an interesting movie. And I remember what I think in your book, or just generally they say when those outer planets are involved,
Oh
that
yes, you
person
get
has a greater
yes,
role with that
yes.
more collective society collective, and so that Mars Pluto definitely makes sense, and that
Mm.
he did this big
Yes.
thing and they even made a movie about it.
Yeah,
That is
you're
wonderful.
yes, if you've got the outer planets as boundary planets, you're likely to get carried away with the collective.
Hmm.
But then of course you have to get deeper into the chart and look at where the planets are and what they're doing and what they're trying to sort of say to you. But just the initial look, like were you there for my talks the other day?
I have not caught the recording yet, but I
Yeah,
plan on
okay.
watching it.
Okay, no, I only ask not not to um make any issue of it, except to
Right.
say that with Paul McCartney's boundary planets, and he's got a wedge chart, it was Venus and Neptune. So you immediately know that's artistic, isn't it? That's
Oh,
going to be
yes.
music and art.
Music
Um,
and art.
it yes, in some way, it shows you immediately. Now Julio Iglesias also has a wedge chart, and it's Mercury Uranus, but yet he is also a musician and singer. So what's the difference? The difference being that Paul McCartney was right from the start a musician, whereas Julio Iglesias was studying to be a lawyer.
Oh,
He was a
interesting.
footballer as well, but that goes more deeply into the chart. Um, and then it brings you into why he become a singer ultimately. So um, you may have two people with the same sort of profession, but what drives them could be a little bit different.
Hmm. Wow. Yes, that. I love the way that you can just see that with those just two simple planets to just like make that stand out for you. Okay, let me see. What other questions do we have?
Do people not all ask questions? They did come and just listen.
They have been asking questions. I'm seeing if I have any left on my list. But
Uh-huh.
again, please comment in the chat box if you have any questions. So Wanda, since you're here, I'm curious, what is your chart shape and how do you resonate with it?
Well, th this is where my chart doesn't. When you look at a chart, sometimes the actual pattern is very clear. When you then
Mm-hmm.
start analyzing it for not astrologically, but you start counting the degrees between planets, and you think, hold on, it's not entirely. So, for instance, if you just looked at my chart, you would immediately see that it is a locomotive. It's got uh, about four empty places, four empty houses, and the start planet is Mercury, and the one that ends is Jupiter. So that
Mm-hmm.
shows Mercury, Jupiter, writing, the mind. That's the way that my life was always led. I live in my mind. But then when I began to actually count the degree, I saw that Jupiter wasn't quite with all the rest, and I
Mm-hmm.
counted the degrees, and it was like over the 60 mark. I thought, well, it's almost like a bit of bit of a back too. So
Yeah.
if you get hung up too much with the degrees, then you can get rather confused. So I think the overall shape, which isn't very technical, I know, but just the shape that attracts you first is probably the one to go for. So mine's a
Okay.
locomotive, and my beginning planet is Mercury. It's a beginning cutting planet, leading planet, sometimes called the rain planet. Um, it's Mercury in Aries.
Mhm.
So that's why I tend to come up with new things and, pioneer things usually, and have lots because in the ninth house. So I can't sleep because I have lots of ideas, and ideas come through all the time. But my Mercury is not strong through essential dignity. So that's how you begin to analyze the planet that you're looking at. Look at
Mm-hmm.
it, how it qualifies and then how it quantifies. But then you look at the dispositor, which for me it's Mars, and that's on an angle. So it
Oh,
gives
okay.
it so this is how you would analyze, as I said, if it doesn't have much dignity, but then the dispositor suddenly looks much stronger, then you
Oh,
would see
yes.
what's behind that planet. So obviously, it may take me a while. I'll think of ideas very quickly, but then it may take me a while because, as I say, it's not strong by dignity. Um, then I get pushed into it through that Mars eventually. So I'm
Okay.
I'm sorry to go on about my own chart, but I was
No,
just kind of just giving the idea of how I would analyze it.
no, I love that. And you're totally welcome to go on about it. But I do think that that insight, because yeah, having that Mercury, but then the dispositor on your angle coming up with great ideas and then the action behind them. Yeah, I do think that does clear things up. And then Joan has a question. Joan says, um, Moon in Pisces first boundary, Jupiter in Libra last boundary. What would be your take on that?
Well, just looking at the boundary planets without knowing anything else,
Right.
um, what was it? Moon in Pisces, was it?
Moon
Sorry.
in Pisces in the first as no, Moon in Pisces as the first boundary planet, Jupiter in Libra as the last boundary planet.
Well, I mean, just those two planets are excellent for the public, appearing appealing to the public. They're
Hmm.
very good and the moon is the public mainly, and Jupiter um, is obviously lucky and optimistic, and the two coming together do bring a lot of success that um and seeing things in a very positive light. Now, I don't know what the shape is of that in
Right.
my, what's the shape?
Joan, do you care to comment the shape of the chart in there? No, but and that's a that I'm interested in those boundary planets because with that Pisces moon, that Jupiter would be its dispositor as well.
It
So,
would. So
mhm,
basically that is very good because she's into either deposited in Libra, you've got other people, so she would get the help of other people or work well with other people. Now, I'm
mhm.
obviously only looking at two things here, just
Right.
not the whole chart, but that's how it would appear with that. Uh, um, cooperation with others at work or in a situation where she would. It's almost like a. Is she a therapist or something
That's what I was thinking. I was like, that sounds, that social
with
element of it.
people? That's right. Yes.
And then the empathy of the Pisces moon. And Joan says she forgot the name of the shape, but it is shaped in three separate areas. So
So could that be like a splay?
that's what I'm thinking. I think that sounds like a splay to me.
Because splay can it's if no other chart, if no other shape comes to mind at all, then it's bound to be a splay. But a splay can take different shapes as well. Um,
Right.
but yeah, that's really good for working with people and cooperating with people, and um, wherever she would find herself, she'd probably get the support of others.
Wonderful. Well, congratulations on getting the support of others, Joan. I hope that's the case for you. But it looks like we are all out of questions. So I think I will go ahead and wrap this up. Um, Wanda, is there anywhere people can continue following you to keep up on your work, like a website or anything?
Well, basically, yes, I did leave a website address, didn't I? I think with you, uh,
Maybe I'll have to
astrolodge.co.uk. No,
maybe I will check my I'll check my emails and see if I can find that. But otherwise
or
I'll just
maybe it
pop
was
it
with
into.
Callum. I'll send you the email with
Okay.
it.
And I will just comment that under this video for everyone if you all want to keep up with Wanda's work. But Wanda, thanks so much for joining us today. I think this was a great Q&A. I had a lot of fun. And thank you for everyone watching. We got a good amount of viewers today. So thank you for everyone who came to watch and who participated in the discussion posts throughout the month. For September, we're reading Of Ravens and Dragonflies, Outer Planet Transits Through the Houses in Astrology by Nadia Shah. And we'll have discussion posts on the first few chapters starting Saturday, September 7th. But if you're still reading chart shapes, the discussion posts are still up. Feel free to participate in them at your leisure. Um, and again, thank you, Wanda, for joining us. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their week.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
You're so welcome. Bye bye.
Bye bye.